Running from a forced destiny only leads you straight into the arms of true fate. There is a particular kind of courage that looks, from the outside, exactly like recklessness. Not the courage of a plan. The courage of a plan is recognizable, has the specific quality of something organized, something that has been thought through in advance, something that has considered the available options and selected among them with the deliberate clarity of a person who has weighed the costs. That courage is admirable and comprehensible, and the social world knows what to do with it. The courage that looks like recklessness is the other kind, the kind that arrives not from deliberation, but from the specific, single moment of recognition that the available alternative is worse than any conceivable consequence of acting. The courage that produces a woman grabbing a velvet cloak and running into the rain on the night before the wedding to a sleazy, elderly lord she did not choose and does not want, with no destination, no plan, and brothers shouting her name in the streets behind her. That is not recklessness. That is the specific courage of a person who has looked at the two available futures and has decided, with the full clarity of someone who has nothing left to protect by being careful, that one of them is not a future she will accept. Lady Evelyn Hartfield had made this decision at approximately 10:30 on a Tuesday evening in November, when the rain was already coming down and the brothers were already in the house, and she had approximately 4 minutes before someone came upstairs to check on the bride who was supposed to be sleeping before the morning ceremony. She had not been sleeping. She had been thinking. She had finished thinking. She ran. Before we get to the carriage, before we watch Evelyn come up from under the seat and meet the coldest, most structured man in England at the worst possible angle, I need to ask you something. Have you ever done something that was, by every reasonable external measure, an absolutely terrible idea, and felt, in the doing of it, more like yourself than you had felt in months? Drop your answer in the comments, because that was Evelyn Hartfield running through the rain in a travel cloak with her wedding dress bundled underneath it. No destination, brothers calling her name, the entire city of London between her and whatever came next. Not a plan, a refusal. And the refusal was the truest thing she had done in a very long time. Subscribe and hit the bell. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room. Now, let's begin. The rain had the specific quality of November rain in London. Not the dramatic, theatrical rain of storms, but the steady, comprehensive kind that communicated that it had been here before the people and would be here after them, and had no particular investment in accommodating their plans. Evelyn ran through it with the specific quality of running that is not athletic but committed. Not the running of someone well prepared for running, but the running of someone for whom running was the only available option and who was running with everything they had, because everything they had was what the situation required. Her brothers' voices were behind her and getting further, which was good. The cobblestones were wet and getting more slippery, which was bad. The dress bundled under the cloak was heavy and getting in the way, which was also bad. She was cold and wet and had no destination, and approximately 30 seconds before someone in the street ahead of her was going to notice the woman in the travel cloak running and was going to form an opinion about it. She needed to not be running. She needed to be somewhere that was not the street. The black carriage was outside the theatre, a large, immaculate, clearly expensive carriage with the quality of private conveyance rather than public hire, the kind that belonged to someone specific rather than to anyone who could pay the rate. It had a coat of arms on the door that she did not have the time to identify. It had, more relevantly, a door that was not locked. She opened it. She got in. She went under the seat with the specific, immediate quality of a person who has identified a hiding position and is occupying it without hesitation, who is settling into the logistics of the hiding, the positioning of the cloak to minimize visible volume, the regulation of breathing to reduce sound, the complete stillness of someone who understands that stillness is the primary requirement. She heard voices outside, the brothers' voices, closer, then moving past, then further. She held the stillness. The carriage door opened. She held the stillness harder. A man got in. She heard the specific quality of a large man settling his weight into carriage seating, the slight compression of the leather, the shift of the vehicle's balance. He did something, opened a book, by the sound of it. The carriage began to move. She counted to 30. She had been under the seat for what she estimated was 3 minutes, and the breathing was becoming a logistics problem because the cloak was heavy and the bundled dress was taking up the airspace she needed. She came up. She came up with the gasp of someone who has been holding their breath longer than comfortable and whose body has made the decision that air was now the priority. She found herself at the level of the seat across from a man who was reading a book and who looked up with the specific quality of someone who has just received the information that there was a woman coming out from under their carriage seat, and who is registering this information with the quality of someone who has a great deal of self-possession. He raised one eyebrow. She looked at him. He looked at her. The carriage continued moving through the rain. He was not, by any available external measure, a man she should have been making requests of. She registered this in the specific, rapid way of a person who has done something impulsive and is now in the moment following the impulse where the full scope of the situation is becoming available. The carriage was very fine. The coat was immaculate. The book was a volume she recognized as significant, which meant the man reading it was probably significant. The eyebrow he had raised had the quality of an eyebrow that was accustomed to producing effects in rooms, that had been deployed in rooms that required eyebrows of this quality. She was a woman who had climbed out from under his seat. She was also soaking wet. She was also in a wedding dress under a travel cloak, which was not a configuration that simplified the explanation. She pressed her hands together. "Please, Your Grace, or whoever you are." She said it with the specific, direct quality of a person who does not have the time or the resources for an elaborate approach, and who is therefore going directly to the heart of the request. "I am going somewhere, far away from here. I cannot tell you the truth, but I beg of you, do not throw me out into the rain. Just let me stay until the next town." She looked at him. He looked at her. He had the expression of a man conducting an assessment, not the quick assessment of someone making a snap judgment, but the deliberate, organized assessment of someone who has been trained to examine situations carefully and who is examining this one. He looked at the dripping cloak. He looked at the flushed cheeks. He looked at her hands pressed together and at her eyes, which had the specific quality of desperation and defiance combined, in the way that they combined in people who had nothing left to manage for, and who were therefore simply, completely, honestly there. He closed his book. "Sit down, my lady," he said. His voice had the quality of a voice that was accustomed to being listened to, not because it was loud, but because it was specific, the voice of someone who said what they meant and expected it to be received. "I will not force you into the storm, but do not touch anything." She sat. She was acutely aware of the dripping. The carriage upholstery was visibly expensive. She arranged herself in the specific, controlled way of someone trying to minimize her wet footprint, while also not appearing to be minimizing her wet footprint, which was complicated. He opened his book again. The carriage moved through the London night. She sat across from him and was very quiet, which was not her natural condition, but which the situation clearly required, and which she was providing with the determined quality of someone who has made a bargain and intends to honor it. Outside, the rain continued. Inside the carriage, there was the specific, slightly charged quality of two people who are in the same small space and who are both very aware of each other while both pretending to be occupied with something else, one of whom was actually reading and one of whom was conducting a comprehensive wet and exhausted assessment of the situation and was trying to do it without appearing to. She looked at him from under her lashes. He turned a page. She looked at the crest on the carriage interior. She went slightly pale. She had just placed the crest. The hours had the specific quality of night travel in rain, the rhythm of the road and the sound of water against the roof, and the warmth of an enclosed space doing the work on a person that warmth does, when a person has been running through the cold, and has finally, for the first time in several hours, been still. She was trying very hard to stay awake. She was failing. She had the specific quality of someone in the intermediate state between waking and sleeping that was the state she found most difficult to manage. The state where the body was beginning to do what it intended to do, regardless of what the mind wanted, where the weight of the head was becoming a factor, where the closing of the eyes was becoming the default condition rather than the managed exception. The carriage hit a variation in the road. She swayed. She was not aware of this happening. She was not aware of the head landing on the shoulder, which she would have been aware of if she had been awake, because it would have been mortifying, and she would have corrected it instantly. She was not aware of the specific, quiet rhythm of her own breathing, which had the quality of someone who has been running and has finally, entirely stopped. She was asleep. Alistair was aware. He was aware with the specific, frozen quality of a man who has had something happen to him that his considerable capacity for structure and organization has not prepared him for, and who is therefore in the specific, suspended moment between the event and the response. The woman who had climbed out from under his seat was asleep on his shoulder. She was warm. She was still slightly damp from the rain, but the warmth of the carriage had been doing its work, and the damp was giving way. She smelled like rain, and something else, a flower he could not immediately name. Wild jasmine, perhaps, the specific scent of something that had not been cultivated, but that had grown where it found the conditions to grow. She was making the small, completely unconscious sounds of someone in deep sleep. Not the performed sleep of someone managing their appearance, but the actual sleep of someone who was entirely gone, who had handed the carriage and the duke and the velvet upholstery and the entire situation over to their sleeping bodies' complete indifference and had departed. He should remove her. This was the obvious, structured response. The response consistent with who he was, with the organization of his life, with the complete indifference to disruption that was one of the defining features of his public character. He should remove her from his shoulder, place her upright in the seat across from him, and return to his book. He did not do this. He sat with a level of stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. Not the stillness of someone who is managing their environment, but the stillness of someone who is trying not to disturb something, who has identified that the disturbance would be wrong, and who is therefore being very careful. He adjusted. He adjusted his posture with the careful, minimal movement of someone who is trying to make something more comfortable, without waking the person whose comfort is in question. And the adjustment allowed her to settle against his chest, rather than just his shoulder, which was a more stable configuration for both of them. He watched her sleep. He watched for a long time, with the specific quality of a man who has found something that his structure and organization had not made provision for, and who is encountering the not having made provision with something that was, on examination, not discomfort. Outside, the rain continued. The carriage moved through the night. He did not open his book. The morning light had the specific quality of morning light after rain, the light of a world that has been washed and that is receiving the sun with the particular, clean quality of surfaces that have been renewed, that are showing the world as it was before the accumulation of ordinary days. Evelyn opened her eyes. She opened them to the specific quality of a moment in which the first sensation is warmth, a warmth that was slightly different from the warmth of blankets, that had a specific quality of being produced by something living rather than something woven, that had the particular, human quality of warmth that arrives from proximity to another person. She was not in a bed. She was in a carriage. She was against a man's chest. She was against the chest of a man she had met at approximately 10:30 the previous night, when she had climbed out from under his seat, having hidden there to escape her brothers, who had been looking for her, because she had run away from her wedding. She lay very still for the approximately 3 seconds between the registering of this information and the beginning of the blush, which was the specific, comprehensive, full coverage blush of a person who has understood the full scope of a situation all at once. Then she sat up. She sat up with the sudden, bolt-upright quality of someone moving from horizontal to vertical in a single, committed motion, which was considerably less graceful than the settling in had apparently been. She looked at him. He was awake. Of course he was awake. He was looking at her with the expression that she was going to need several weeks to stop thinking about, which was not the expression of a man who was angry or who was going to make what had happened into a social situation that required management, but the expression of a man who had been watching something for several hours and who was now watching the thing wake up. She was suddenly very aware of the wedding dress under the cloak. "Forgive me." She said it with the specific, committed quality of someone who has identified that speed is the appropriate approach and who is applying it. "I thank you for your charity." The carriage was pulling into an inn. The door. She was at the door. The door was right there. She was out of the carriage before he had said anything. She was in the market square before he had finished whatever expression his face was in the process of producing. She was gone. He stepped out. He stood in the morning light outside the coaching inn, and he looked at the market square where she had gone, and the market square had the specific quality of a busy space that had absorbed someone without trace, which was the quality of spaces in which a person who wanted to disappear was able to disappear. She was gone. He looked down at his hand. He had picked it up automatically, without decision. The handkerchief she had dropped on the seat in the bolt for the door, small, embroidered, the kind that belonged to a particular person and that communicated, through its embroidery, the care of a specific someone making a specific thing for a specific person. He closed his hand around it. His shoulder was cold. This was information. He stood in the morning market with the handkerchief in his fist, and he was, for the first time in a considerable number of years, in the specific condition of a man who has had something happen to him and who does not have a response to it that is consistent with his prior model of how things happened. He had a name. He did not have a name. He had a handkerchief. He would find the name, the grand unmasking. He looked for her for 2 weeks. He applied the considerable resources available to a man in his position to the specific problem of identifying an unknown woman who had been a runaway bride in London on a Tuesday in November, and the resources had produced, across 2 weeks, a cold trail, which was the specific, frustrating quality of a trail, belonging to a person who had not wanted to be found, and who had managed the not being found with an efficiency that he found, against his frustration, something approaching admiring. She had been thorough. He had not found her. He attended the King's Assembly because not attending was not an option available to a man of his position, and because the Assembly was the occasion he would normally have attended, and the 2 weeks of looking had not produced a viable alternative to resuming the normal occasions of his life. He stood on the balcony. He was not attending to the Assembly with his full attention. He was attending to it with the portion of his attention not occupied by the specific, persistent presence of a woman he could not identify, who had slept against his chest for 4 hours, who had bolted out of his carriage before he could ask her name, and whose handkerchief he had been carrying for 2 weeks in the pocket of his coat, which was not a thing he had decided to do, but which was a thing he was apparently doing. The herald announced a prominent house. He looked down. She was in an emerald gown. She was in an emerald gown, and she was not running. She was standing in the entrance of the ballroom, with the full, composed, unmanaged quality of a person who has arrived somewhere they have decided to be, who is present in the room with the specific, settled quality of someone who is no longer fleeing, and who has, in the stopping of the fleeing, arrived at something. She had the quality of a woman who has been through something and has come out the other side of it with a clarity she did not have before. She was looking at the room. She was not looking at the balcony. He left the balcony. He descended the stairs with the directness of a man who has identified his direction and is going in it, which was his characteristic quality and which had never previously been deployed toward a ballroom floor in the manner it was currently being deployed. He moved through the room. The lords who were in his path adjusted themselves from his path in the instinctive way of people who have identified, from the quality of a man's movement, that the path is where he intends to be, and that the intelligent response is to be elsewhere. He stopped. He was in front of her. She had not seen him approach. She had been doing the thing she apparently did, which was looking at what was actually interesting in her immediate vicinity, rather than conducting the ambient social scan of a person managing their own visibility. She had been looking at a painting on the wall near the entrance. She looked away from the painting. She looked at him. The recognition arrived in stages, the face first, then the quality of the presence, then the full, complete assembly of the information, which was that the man standing in front of her in the King's Assembly ballroom was the man from the carriage, which was the man whose shoulder she had slept on for 4 hours, which was the man she had fled from at the coaching inn at sunrise, which was the man whose name she had seen on the crest, but had been hoping she had misread. She had not misread it. "You ran away before I could introduce myself, my lady." He said it in the voice that was not cold, or was cold in the specific way that cold could be something other than hostile, that it could be simply his quality, the quality of someone who did not produce warmth for performance, but who had, she remembered from 4 hours of being against it, warmth in the specific, actual, non-performed sense. "I am Duke Alistair." He looked at her. "And I believe you owe my shoulder an apology." He let this sit for exactly the correct amount of time. "Shall we dance?" She looked at him. She had the specific, comprehensive expression of a woman who is in several conditions simultaneously. Mortified, certainly, amused, unmistakably, relieved in the way of someone who has been looking for something without knowing they were looking for it, and who has just found it, and the particular, sharpened quality of someone who is about to say something back. She looked at the hand he was offering. She looked at his face. She took his hand. "The shoulder," she said, allowing herself to be led toward the floor, "was very comfortable. You should be flattered, not aggrieved." "I am aware it was comfortable," he said. "I adjusted my position to ensure it." She stopped. She looked at him. He looked back with the expression she had not had the opportunity to properly see in the carriage, which was now visible, which was the expression of a man who has been carrying a handkerchief in his coat for 2 weeks, and who is, in this moment, looking at the person the handkerchief belongs to, and who is finding the moment sufficient. The orchestra began. She was aware, as they moved into the dance, that the entire ballroom was observing this. The Duke, who had walked through the room, ignoring the bowing lords, now dancing with a woman who had walked in from a prominent house in emerald silk. The conversation between them, too quiet to hear, but with the specific quality of two people who are already in something, rather than two people who are beginning something. They were already in something. They had been in something since 10:30 on a Tuesday in November, when she had come up from under his seat, gasping for air, and he had raised one eyebrow, and the rain had continued on the roof, and neither of them had known, in that moment, what the carriage was carrying. It had been carrying them, toward each other, through the rain. The road had known, whether it was fate, or the mechanics of a November storm, and an available carriage, and the specific sequence of a woman with nowhere to go, finding a door that was not locked. There was something that the road had known, that neither of them had, which was that the destination was not the next town. The destination was here. He had his hand at her waist. She had stopped running. The orchestra played, and the ballroom turned, and the emerald of her gown moved through the candlelight, and the handkerchief that had been in his pocket for 2 weeks was still in his pocket, which was where it was going to stay. Tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you? Was it the carriage door opening and the dive under the seat, the "please do not throw me into the rain," the shoulder and the adjusting of his posture so she could sleep more comfortably, the handkerchief in the fist outside the coaching inn, or the "you owe my shoulder an apology," and she took his hand anyway? Drop it below. I want to know what you are carrying from this one. And tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next story opens with a woman who discovers, the morning after a masked ball, that the man she danced with for 3 hours and told everything to, her actual name, her actual situation, her actual self, was the man her family had arranged for her to meet at the ball in disguise, to assess whether she was worth marrying. And she finds this out before he does, and what she does with the 3 days between the finding out and the arranged formal introduction is the whole story. I'll see you there.